What if the ancient stories of the garden, Paul's one act, and the wilderness temptation weren't about sin and salvation, but about growing up as a species? Perhaps it's time to take a closer look at the secular trinity of reason, responsibility, and integrity, and discover what it looks like to live those principles in our everyday lives. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper into something that came up during the main episode. We spent the majority of this week's main episode for the first Sunday of Lent, Cycle A, looking at three ancient stories: the garden, Paul's reflection on shared responsibility, and the wilderness temptation of Jesus. And we pulled from them what I call a secular trinity of lessons. Not supernatural, not theological, just very practical. If we strip away the mythology and look at the human meaning underneath these stories, here's what we're left with: the sovereignty of reason, the social contract, and the integrity of the self. In other words, reason, responsibility, and integrity, what I call the secular trinity. In this podcast, I don't want to debate those ideas. I want to ask something much more important. What would it actually look like to live this way? Because if these ideas don't change how we show up on a Tuesday afternoon, at work, at home, in traffic, in a disagreement, then they're just philosophy. So let's see if we can make them a bit more practical in this episode of Afterthoughts. Okay, first up, the sovereignty of reason. Basically, it's about how to think like a free human being. Genesis gives us the awakening, the moment human beings move from instinct to choice, from reaction to reflection, if you will. The sovereignty of reason means this: you are not just a bundle of impulses. You are a thinking being. You can evaluate your own behavior. That sounds simple, but it's not. Most of us live reactively more often than we realize. We snap, we assume, we defend, we forward the article without checking if it's factually correct. We raise our voices when we get pissed about something. We double down if someone challenges our idea or our position on something. Instinct is fast. Reason is slower. Living under the sovereignty of reason means building space between the stimulus and our response. It means asking, is this aligned with my values or just with my current mood? That one question can change your life. At home, that might mean not firing back during an argument. Instead of reacting to someone's tone or voice, you pause and ask, what is actually happening here? At work, it might mean not joining the gossip circle. It might mean asking yourself, is this conversation constructive or just sort of emotionally satisfying? Online, it might mean not hitting share until you've verified the source. Not commenting in rage just because you felt triggered again. Now, it's important to understand that reason doesn't mean coldness. It means clarity. Reason means recognizing that just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it. And this is what makes us human in the very deepest sense. The knowledge of good and evil isn't about shame. It's about discernment. You cannot live ethically if you're simply reacting to whatever stimulus hits you first. The sovereignty of reason is the foundation. Without it, everything else sort of collapses. All right, next up, we've got the social contract. This is about simply living like your choices matter. It's about taking responsibility for the things you say and do. Let's think about our reading from the letter to the Romans that we went over in the main episode this week. Not the theology, but sort of the pattern. Paul talks about one person affecting everyone. Strip away the supernatural stuff, and what you're left with is something very simple. Your behavior shapes the world around you. There is no such thing as a purely private action. Every habit contributes to culture. Every tone sets a tone. Every choice either reinforces dysfunction or offsets it. We are biological heirs to one another. We inherit systems, patterns, traditions, traumas, privileges, but we're also contributors to what comes next. So here's the practical question. What kind of social inheritance are you creating? In your home, think about it. In your home, are you modeling apology or are you modeling defensiveness? Are you modeling emotional regulation or are your emotions swinging around, triggered by whatever stimuli you encounter? And let me give you a hint. If you ever find yourself raising your voice with a family member, you're not regulating your emotions. You're being controlled by them. And that's not good. It's weakness. It's not strength, no matter how loud you're yelling. Anyway, with your kids, are you teaching them to pause and think, or to focus on winning arguments at all costs? At work, are you reinforcing cynicism, or are you elevating someone else's contribution? If someone else walks into a workspace right after you've left it, what atmosphere have you created behind you? Is everyone tense and on edge? Or are they open and positive? In your neighborhood, do you know your neighbors' names? Do they know yours? Have you built even a small layer of mutual recognition? Look, civilization doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes through accumulated small failures. But it also strengthens through accumulated small acts of integrity. One righteous act isn't dramatic, but it is cumulative. It's the daily commitment to pro-social behavior that offsets the errors of the past. And here's the liberating part. You don't have to fix the whole freaking system. You just have to improve what's in your radius. You just have to improve what's around you. That's the social contract. That's your responsibility. Okay, last but not least, we have the integrity of the self. You can think of this as the wilderness test. The integrity of the self. This is where everything sort of gets real, because knowing what's right, that's relatively easy if you spend any time at all figuring out what your core values are. Doing what's right, especially when it costs you something, that's the real test. And let's be clear, the wilderness isn't supernatural, it's psychological. For purposes of this discussion, the wilderness is the moment when you could cut the corner, you could take a shortcut, you could stay silent to protect yourself, and no one would blame you because no one would know. But remember that integrity shows up when no one is watching, but there's something to gain or something to lose. So financially, do you report everything honestly? Professionally, do you tell the uncomfortable truth? Socially, do you refuse to laugh at the cruel joke? Personally, do you keep the commitments you made to yourself? So let me give you a little bit of a diagnostic tool that you can use to evaluate your values. Ask yourself this. What would it take for me to abandon this value? And when I say abandon, it doesn't necessarily need to mean permanently. However, if you claim something as a value and only abide by it when it's convenient, then is it really one of your values? I don't think so. Anyway, ask yourself, what would it take for me to abandon this value? Money? Could someone pay you enough to abandon that value? Approval. With so many people battling for influence online, approval can be very enticing. Or security. It can feel a lot safer to just not get involved, to just look the other way. And what about belonging? Ironically, that's a huge issue for many religious people, not just Christians. Many people abandon certain personal values to remain a member of their religious community. Now, I used to work with many, many good people at the U.S. Department of Labor, most of whom, I'm positive, would claim that you couldn't pay them enough money to abandon their values. And yet, most of them are still quietly toiling away, doing the bidding of a president they despise because they don't want to lose their job. They look the other way while worker protections are quietly being gutted. They abandon the values that they've supported for so many years to keep their paychecks. I'm sorry to say it, but that is an example of abandoning your values for money. So, what would it take for you to abandon one of your values? Money? Approval? Security? Belonging? Whatever it is, that's your wilderness. That's where your integrity to the self is tested. Knowledge and power are dangerous without discipline. You can know what's right and still choose what's convenient. The wilderness proves whether your values are decorative or durable. Now, let's bring it all together because the secular Trinity, reason, responsibility, and integrity, they work best when they work together. Reason without social responsibility, it just becomes sort of a detached intellectualism. Social responsibility without integrity is really just performative. It's just for show. Integrity without reason can become this entrenched, stubborn moralism. So you need all three. The sovereignty of reason, the social contract, the integrity of the self. The easier to remember version is this: reason, responsibility, integrity. We need reason, responsibility, and integrity. But let me give you an action-oriented version that you can actually use. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. That's it. That's the rhythm. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. When you do that consistently, something powerful happens. You start trusting yourself. You stop being emotionally hijacked by every clickbait headline. You stop drifting with whatever crowd is the loudest. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. Focus on that, and you'll build internal stability. Other people will trust you more because you're predictable, not rigid, but principled. And this is where confidence comes from. Not arrogance, confidence. The quiet knowledge that your behavior is aligned with your values. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. So, how about we try to make this even a bit more concrete? This week, I want you to try a few things. First of all, pick one moment where you will deliberately exercise the sovereignty of reason. A moment when you will focus on thinking clearly. And maybe it's a conversation you know is coming. Maybe it's a recurring trigger that you know you're going to experience again. Whatever it is, decide ahead of time. Decide that I will pause before responding. That's it. That's task number one. Pick a time to think clearly. Here's task number two, and it's about the social contract, about acting responsibly. I want you to identify one space where your behavior contributes to a culture. Is it at home, at work, in a friend group, whatever the space is? Ask yourself, what kind of social inheritance am I reinforcing? This is about recognizing the ongoing impact your actions are having on the people around you. Think about your actions in whatever space you choose and ask yourself, what kind of social inheritance am I reinforcing? And then make one small adjustment that might improve that social inheritance. All right, your third task is to identify your wilderness. Where are you tempted to compromise? Think about it and then name it clearly. And if you can't name it, then you can't face it. Once you've named it, then decide where you're going to draw the line. Because if you don't decide ahead of time, the decision is going to be made emotionally in the moment, and that's rarely a good thing. And so that's your threefold challenge for the week. Pick a moment when you will think clearly, contribute positively by acting more responsibly in one of your social circles, and then set boundaries around your wilderness in order to guard your character. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. All right, before I close this out, I want to remind you that you don't need a supernatural authority to live this way. You need awareness, you need responsibility, and you need a little discipline. The evolution of human agency didn't end in the Garden of Eden. It continues in me and in you and in every other human being out there. Every day, you can think clearly. You can act responsibly. You can guard your character and prove that your values are not for sale. And when enough people live that way, civilization doesn't just survive, it matures. Think clearly, act responsibly, guard your character. That's the secular Trinity. It's not a doctrine, but it could be a daily practice, and it's available to anyone who's willing to do the work. All right, thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll keep you updated on the weekly live streams of Mythologizing the Bible. If you subscribe for free over at the Coda Project, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for different age groups. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide explains why activism is important, the philosophy behind kitchen table activism, and the foundational values it supports, before laying out how to use the tools you have to make your voice heard. It does provide tools and tactics and templates, all for you to use, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. While you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you'll start receiving my newsletter called The Kitchen Table Activist. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.